Welcome, my name's Doctor Warrick Bishop. I'm a cardiologist, I'm an author and a keynote speaker. I'm CEO of the Healthy Heart Network. I'm all about trying to help people live as well as possible for as long as possible. Heart disease is huge in Australia. Every 20 minutes someone suffers a heart attack. Most of these could probably have been avoided if only we knew what to do. This podcast is all about helping you understand blood pressure, weight, cholesterol for better health. If you enjoy this podcast, I would be honoured for a 5-star review. You can share it with your family and friends. It may well save someone you love. Hi, it's Dr. Warrick here and welcome to my podcast and videocast station. I have Professor Nicholas Talley with me. He is a gastroenterologist, an epidemiologist, a researcher. He's an educator and an author. He actually will have done the podcast just before this one. So if you missed that, go back and have a listen. We're back for part 2 of gut microbiome. In the first episode, which I really do encourage you going back and having a listen to, we recognize that the gut microbiome is incredibly complicated. We're talking millions to billions of organisms and has an incredible interplay with how the body works, not just your gut, but beyond that, even to the brain. So welcome, Nick. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Thank you for having me.
Look, some of the things that we were talking about previously were absolutely fascinating, and all I can do is encourage anyone who missed that last podcast to go back and have a listen. But we touched on the interplay between the gut and other systems, diabetes, Parkinson's disease, and obesity. Well, I'll share something with you really to try and get an understanding and your comments around the protective role of the gut microbiome. And I was sitting in a presentation a year or two ago at a medical conference where they were talking about salt and high blood pressure. Now, for those listening, historically, we've always thought if you eat too much salt, then water follows that salt. That increase in water increases the blood volume. The increase in the blood volume leads to greater pressures in the body, and that greater pressure in the body drives wear and tear on the arteries, making them thickened, and therefore blood pressure becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And I've been dealing with that for a long time. I have to say I was never completely sold on the salt story because it didn't seem to make sense. I always wondered why dolphins didn't have high blood pressure, but that's a different issue. As I sat there and listened to the presentation, they really outlined a series of experiments where they loaded salt into a diet of hypertensive sensitive rats and demonstrated that the salt caused microbiome damage, which exposed the gut and created leaky gut, which allowed particles to get into the bloodstream, and those particles, which were inflammatory particles, ended up in the blood vessels and made them thicker, driving the high blood pressure from the inflammation of the blood vessel, not from the salt and water. They fixed or reversed this process or altered this process by adding fiber to the experiment. And I sat there, honestly, Nick, and I was blown away. I thought, this is just amazing. So speak to us about this concept of leaky gut, how the microbiome protects that leaky gut, and what other things leak in and what other conditions are impacted. Maybe Parkinson's is on that spectrum as well.
So we do think leaky gut is an important disease factor. We really do. And I know alternative practitioners have been talking about this for a long time, but they haven't really understood what was been going on. But now we're starting to see evidence, the real science behind this, that there is leakiness of the gut that allows bacterial factors and other organisms to interact with the immune system. That's one way it drives change. It also allows food to interact with the immune system. So all of the foods we eat are potentially allergic, if you like, they're antigenic. and that can lead to interactions with the immune system, and then that can lead to disease. There are other mechanisms too, because once the gut's leaky, there's no doubt anything in the lumen of the gut, anything in there that shouldn't normally get to the cells below will get in potentially, little bits of it. And that can lead to an active inflammation. And inflammation is one of the key drivers of all chronic diseases virtually, from cancers to heart disease to most things that we worry about as chronic disease. We know inflammation's a key driver. What drives the leakiness? Probably there are lots of different factors. Probably there can be genetic factors, there can be environmental factors. So if you take a medication like a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug like aspirin or ibuprofen, that can lead to the gut getting leaky because it damages the gut lumen, damages the gut wall. That allows things to get in, and that leads to problems down the track. The bacteria interacting with the food can lead to reactions as well. You can get kind of an allergic response to that interaction. And we've been studying that in a number of diseases because it seems highly relevant that if we can identify the factors that drive the leakiness, that might be a way, and drive the inflammation, that might be a set of factors we can modify relatively easily. And you mentioned fiber. We've known for a long time a high fiber diet tends to produce a more diverse microbiome, which means a healthier microbiome. By the way, going and getting your microbiome tested commercially, don't bother, don't waste your money, because at the moment, most of those tests are just completely worthless. They just don't tell you anything that allows you to work out what to do. But having a high fiber diet, a healthy diet, yes, lots of vegetables, lots of fruit, those simple things make your microbiome healthier, and that really helps.
Look, while we're on those things that you can take, let's just break down probiotics, prebiotics, and the sort of supplements people may want to think about if they're wanting to maximize their gut health. What's a probiotic, first of all?
So a probiotic is, the theory of probiotics is you give a healthy group of you give healthy organisms, or organisms that you find in healthy people. They're live organisms, they're supposed to be alive. And you take these to repopulate your gut microbiome bacteria. So that's the theory, and we've known about this for 100 years, and we've isolated these various organisms from many, many years ago, often, and these are put into probiotics that you buy at the chemist for lots of money. What are the problems? Most times the bugs have died in the capsules before you even get them in. So you're often eating dead bugs, not live bugs. And that's why, if you're taking them off the shelf rather than from the fridge, you've got to wonder if they're really alive or not. Sometimes they are, but sometimes they're not. The other problem with them is they don't repopulate the gut microbiome. They just pass through mostly because the gut microbiome doesn't like new bugs coming in. It basically resists new bugs coming in. You have to displace the old bugs to get in new bugs often. And the probiotics alone don't do this very well. So probiotics can have health benefits in very small amounts, not large amounts in terms of the studies that have been done. So you do see small benefit effects sometimes, but the data's all over the place. And so what I say is probiotics mostly don't help you very much. You're much better with a healthy diet. Prebiotics are basically substances that help the good bacteria to grow and the bad bacteria don't grow as well. That's what a prebiotic is. We're very interested in prebiotics, but fiber's a prebiotic. Fibers, it's what you're doing with fiber when you eat fiber diet, high fiber diet.
When we see medical headlines really discussing the problems with ultra-processed food, is that ultra-processed food having a detrimental effect on the gut microbiome as well?
Certainly, ultra-processed foods are everywhere in our diet. You look at the supermarket shelves, many of the things we buy, we all eat them, by the way. Many of the things we buy are ultra-processed. And basically they're like chemicals we're eating in our food. There's more and more evidence, unfortunately, that these things can cause leaky gut, which we talked about earlier. So that's one issue. They can change the microbiome in ways that are unhealthy, not healthy, and they've been linked to a number of chronic diseases. Although whether they're really cause and effect, in other words, direct causes, is a little bit less certain from the data I've seen. So bottom line is, if keeping ultra processed foods, that's things like potato chips and all sorts of things that we buy in packets. Almost everything in a packet is ultra processed. The less we eat of that, the more we eat healthy foods that are, fruits and vegetables, things that we know are not ultra processed, the better off we will probably be in terms of our general health. But you can't avoid ultra processed foods. It's impossible not to eat some.
Certainly from a cardiologist perspective, the salt and the trans fats are problematic just of their own, let alone their effect on the
Yep.
gut microbiome. So,
Yep, absolutely.
yeah, so try and avoid stuff with barcodes if you're listening.
It's true, actually. And it's really interesting, the gut bacteria, also the nutrients that we eat affect atherosclerosis risk as well, which of course is the ultimate factor driving heart disease. So some of the things like in our foods, we eat certain chemicals, certain food products like choline and carnitine, and that gets sort of changed in the body by bacteria to a particular chemical that actually drives your atherosclerosis risk. So it's interesting, the gut microbiome and food are part of the atherosclerosis cycle, probably.
Look, I'll mention that I'll come back to that inflammation very briefly for those listening, just to give an example. And we're talking about the whole gut microbiome, which is really from the lips right through to the anus. I had a patient who I can clearly remember with recurrent problematic atrial fibrillation, so the irregular beating of the heart because the top chambers of the heart are playing up. This particular person had periodontitis and quite bad gums. And when they had that fixed, when they had it attended to, their atrial fibrillation disappeared. It disappeared, which for me was an incredible observation. I hadn't seen it written, I hadn't seen it documented. It makes perfect sense, but you've got how many meters of gastrointestinal tract from one end to the other? It's got to
Oh,
be 18,
it's
20 meters.
very, very long. The old 30 feet number comes to mind. It's incredibly long. Of course, no, we measure things differently, but it's incredibly long. Yeah.
So there's patches everywhere that can be potentially at risk. So look after that gut microbiome. One of the questions I did want to ask, and it comes around from time to time, and I think of it myself if I'm caught in the situation, is if we have an intercurrent illness, a chest infection, or an ear infection, or whatever it might be, and we need antibiotics, what impact does that have on the gut microbiome, and how do you guide someone through that process?
So antibiotics have a huge negative effect on the gut microbiome. In fact, it has a negative effect on all the microbiomes in the body, we believe. And that effect is not just necessarily short-lived. There are data which show that if you follow an individual for a reasonably long time, I'm talking several months or even longer, and people have done these experiments, the microbiome diversity really gets impacted very badly by a general, by an antibiotic. Most antibiotics seem to do this, although it varies by how broad spectrum the antibiotic is, of course. But regardless, it has a negative effect. And that effect then leads to changes in the microbiome that occur in like almost a zigzag shape. It will go up, it'll go down and change over several months. Eventually may get back into more of a normal pattern for that individual, but not always. So sometimes it can be very long disturbances. So what's really being said here is if you don't need an antibiotic, don't take one. That's really important. Of course, if you do need one because you have an acute infection that must be taken, then that's absolutely fine. Some people suggest trying to give probiotics or other approaches to help maintain the microbiome, but the evidence that's really beneficial is incredibly limited. So I don't think that really helps. But again, the healthy diet story is probably critically important if you can maintain that. So look, for most people, it doesn't lead to any long-term health negative effects, but theoretically, multiple courses of antibiotics may predispose you to new disease. And one of the risk factors for inflammatory bowel disease is having had multiple courses of antibiotics.
Okay.
So, it's certainly potentially a risk for chronic disease down the track.
Wow. So eating your yogurt and making sure you've got plenty of fiber, useful things if you're being prescribed antibiotics?
Well, yogurt certainly, has bacteria in it that are thought to be relatively healthy. How many survive through the stomach acid and down into the small intestine where they're needed varies very much. But I guess not certainly unlikely to hurt you and probably could have some benefit. But I think the high fiber diet, the healthy diet, what's called the Mediterranean diet is often thought to be the healthiest diet in terms of not just cardiovascular health, but general health as well. All of those things can be useful. I also tell my patients, because we underestimate the importance of this, exercise helps shape the microbiome in a positive way as well. Getting exercise is good for your health regardless. Make sure that that's part of your active health promotion going forward.
Look, we're going to come towards the end. I just, because we've again blown another 15 minutes effortlessly, what I would like to try and finish off with is, what are some practical tips? You said that it's not worth testing gut microbiome, but is there a way that people listening might be able to get a handle on whether their gut microbiome is healthy or unhealthy, or any comments on that?
I guess it's not an easy question to answer. Certainly, if you've got a healthy microbiome, you'll have normally you have a normal bowel habit. So if you've got constipation or you've got loose bowel motions, that might suggest the bowel microbiome is not as healthy as it could be, and that may be an indicator, of that, a very simple one. The amount of times we open our bowels actually correlates very well with how fast things move through our gut. So that's another indicator of health, I suppose. But unfortunately, we don't have any easy ways of doing this. And we don't have any great tests that we can say, oh, this will help you work out what to do and tell you to eat a healthier diet. It's really the other way around. Measuring what you eat, looking at what you eat, and then deciding if it's healthy, and then going towards a more healthy diet going forward. But I guess my biggest message is this, we are only half human. I really want to emphasize this. There are 30 trillion human cells. There are 39 trillion microbial cells in every single one of us. There are 20,000 human genes. There are up to 20 million microbial genes. We're 43% human in terms of cells and 1% human in terms of genes. Just think about it.
Wow, that's an insane statistic. Look, with that, which is a bit of a mind-boggling concept, I think we might wrap it up for fear of going down a black hole of uncertainty. For those listening, thank you so much for giving me your time, and I really hope you found this chat with Professor Nicholas Talley as informative as I have. I'm sure you will have. If you've got any queries or questions or suggestions for future podcasts, hit us up at info@drwarrickbishop.online. Nick, again, I'd like to thank you once more for finding the time to share.
Thank you very much for having me.
And for those listening, until next time, I hope you live as well as possible, for as long as possible. Take care and bye for now. Hi, ever wondered what your risk of heart attack is? You should. It's the single biggest killer in the Western world. We're talking one death less than every 30 minutes in Australia, 1 death, less than every 60 seconds in the United States, 9 million deaths globally per annum. Well, how do you check your risk? Well, you can go to www.virtualheartcheck.com.au. You'll find out about your risk and what can be done beyond that to be even more precise.